Welcome to the Wealthy Speaker Podcast. This is the podcast dedicated to people who want to speak more as a way to build their income and grow their business. Well, welcome everyone to the Wealthy Speaker Podcast. I'm your host, Jane Atkinson. Today on the show, we're going to be talking about audience engagement and different ways that you can gain more audience engagement. I wanted to tap into someone who's had like a long-term and very successful speaking business for this topic. And so we're so lucky to have on the line with us, Stephen Shapiro. Welcome, Steve.
Hey there, Jane. Good to be here.
Oh, I'm so happy and grateful for you taking the time out. Now, you have been in the business for how many years now?
On my own since 2001. So we're knocking on the 20-year mark.
We are coming up there to 2 decades. Okay, so tell us, circle back to, and give us the Reader's Digest version of your journey into this business.
Sure. So I started off right out of college. Well, in college, I was an engineer. Went to Accenture, which back then was Arthur Andersen Consulting. Spent my formative years, my first 15 years with them, doing consulting work, traveling around. And then I started doing a lot of speaking the last about 8 years while I was there. And I ended up leading this 20,000 person innovation practice. I was on the road all the time speaking. I was approached to do a book, and my first book came out in 2001. So that's how I got to the world of speaking, as I left Accenture when the book came out.
Wow. And so you've kind of had innovation. Is there another kind of aspect of innovation that you've added on to that? Have you layered your career, or has it been all in on innovation this entire time?
I've had one lane. It's been innovation. Now, innovation is obviously a broad enough term that it can mean a lot of different things. So
Sure.
I talk about collaboration, which is one aspect. I talk about disruption, which is another aspect of innovation. So, I have these little offshoots, but at its core, everything I've ever done has been on innovation.
And how important has picking a lane been to your success, would you say?
I certainly think it's been helpful, especially since I chose the lane of innovation before anybody was using the word innovation. I think sometimes the challenge becomes if you're choosing a lane that becomes very crowded, now you're in LA, Los Angeles traffic. And that's what it feels like right now is everybody wants to be an innovation person because it's the hot topic du jour. And so it's sometimes, it's figuring out like, how do I go down a parallel road rather than staying on the highway with everybody else where it's crowded?
Right. And so you're doing lots of innovative things in your own business in order to elevate you up above everybody else. And you're getting ready to put out your 6th book. Congratulations on that. That's huge. And tell us a little bit about, what's the book called? And you're releasing it a little bit differently than the norm. So even you're in it, we're kind of learning about audience engagement today, but we're also learning about innovation in your business today as well. So there's a lot going on, a lot to unpack in this podcast for people. Yeah, tell us about your next book.
Sure. So first I'll talk about the release strategy, because that will be sort of the caveat before I give you the title of the book. Because of engagement, and I think engagement before a book comes out is important, I've actually decided to do a 6-month pre-release. So we'll have the books in hand next week. They will only be given away to people. You can't buy it. There's no ISBN number. It is purely a tool to get feedback, to build engagement, to build some advocates, but also to get new stories that can ultimately be included in the book. We're also developing a number of tools and technologies to support the book. So we'll do a formal release probably in about 6 months. And this first release is really just to get the word out and get some feedback and build that excitement. So the working title is, at least for the pre-release version, is 25 Lenses. So it's 25 lenses that reveal hidden solutions to your most difficult problems. And it's basically a book on how you can pretty much solve any problem if you can change your perspective. And it's 25 different lenses, 25 different tools that allow you to look at a problem from a completely different angle that will help you find a solution when you're stuck.
Oh, that is so intriguing. And so you're kind of pulling some crowdsourcing in there. So let's say I read the book and I say, hey, I have an application of this lens. let me share the story with you, and now my story could be included in the book. Is that
That's the
kind of what
plan.
you're thinking? That is so good. That congratulations. I'm very excited for you, and I like 25 lenses. I feel like it's really nice and sticky. So okay, so now we're going to share how people can get a hold of you and get a hold of that pre-release book, because I think we'll be releasing this audio before you're done with that 6-month trial. So we'll share that at the end of the podcast. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about your speaking career, because you're in a couple of decades now, and you've had some pretty big, I mean, I've been watching you kind of from afar now. We worked together a little bit in the early days, and you were basically just ready to take off with or without me. And talk about how you felt and what the accomplishment was for getting into the Speaking Hall of Fame.
Oh yeah. Well, that was I don't know. I think when you've been doing things for a while, it's hard to have an objective opinion of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, when I got that designation, it was certainly a huge honor, because I looked to the peers. I always looked to the other CPAEs and said, "Wow, these are some pretty amazing people," and to be included into the club with them, to me, was a huge honor. And it's as you go through, you need these points of reinforcement to
Mm-hmm.
just keep on reminding you that you're on the right track, because it's
Yeah.
very easy to get busy and like, okay, wait, have I lost the plot? And so I think it's great to have those moments.
Yeah. And I feel like you're one of these people who have gone along not necessarily getting all of the kudos that you've deserved for building really an outstanding business. You've done really, really well. And I think you've just done it quietly without like a lot of chest beating and what have you, just to say, I'm out here doing this amazing business. And so when you do get that feather in your cap, I think that it's nice for you to say, okay, well, my peers, have recognized it. I don't know. Has being kind of doing the business quietly been a strategy of yours?
I think it just fits my personality.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not a person who necessarily uh, likes a lot of self promotion.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that I'm necessarily private, but I don't like self promotion. To me, always felt a little, I don't know, little slimy, and it's not my cup of tea.
It's not you.
But it's
Sure.
not me. But and I think in some respects it sometimes works against me a little bit, because I don't get sort of the recognition that some other people have, because I'm not beating the drum as often as I could.
Right.
But I think sometimes you just have to choose the strategy that works for you,
Yeah.
recognizing that it will produce different results.
Yes, and you will get there as well. And let's talk about it though under the context of a sales call. You're up for a particular keynote, and the reason why I know you're winning the business is because you've had this long-term success and you're busy. You're really, really busy. That's the reason why I know that whole reluctance to beat the drum is not necessarily affecting you when you get on a sales call, because I think you recognize what your value is very clearly to the client. Is that what you would
Yeah,
agree with?
I look. I know what I do. I also know what I do is different than what a lot of other people do. Even though I talk about innovation and there's 10 million people talking about innovation, my perspective on innovation is different. My experience is much deeper than most people, but also the way I deliver the content is quite a bit different than the way a lot of people other people are. But it's interesting because I've looked at my business and where my work comes from, and 90% of my work is, I would call, word of mouth. It's either a client who's hired me before,
Yeah.
somebody who's in the audience of a speech, or a bureau I've done work with before. So the beating of the chest and being braggadocious is not necessarily needed if you have enough of that word of mouth going for you.
That's good. Okay, so that's a nice segue for us to go into the experience that you are creating with audiences, which is then creating that word of mouth. And the be good strategy of speaking is an amazing strategy. And I know you've got lots of marketing and different things going on, but really, this is a really key idea for people, that when they go and deliver a presentation, for that to spin into 2 or 3 more is one of the best forms of marketing. So let's talk about the experience that you're delivering when you're out on the big platform. Do you mostly speak on big stages? That's kind of where I see you. Is that accurate?
I'm all over the map. I mean,
Are you?
I like the big stages, but actually, I'm heading overseas for 2 weeks, 2 different locations, one in South America, one in Europe, one in Asia, and it's going to be 15 people. So I do everything.
So that's like C-suite or something like that?
This is
Because,
the CEO
okay.
and the direct reports type of thing. So,
Okay.
and I love those but that's more of an advisory workshopy feel. For the
Yes.
speeches, it tends to be the bigger audiences, but to me, it doesn't matter. Size is not important. It's the energy I create in the room. That to me is what's important, which is why I want to create experiences for people, because I find that's the best way to raise the energy level.
Okay, so let's talk about it, say, from a keynote perspective. You're on the stage, there's hundreds of people in the audience. What are some of the things that you might do that would make it memorable for people?
So there's a number. One of them is one of my speeches is called Personality Poker. Personality Poker is based on a tool I developed. It's a card game. And so these are decks of poker cards with words on them, 52 cards. And what we do is, before people sit down, we just deal out 5 random cards to everyone's seat. And then we go through a process of trading. So imagine you have a ballroom with 1,000 people in Las Vegas at a casino.
That's fun.
And each person has 5 cards in front of them. I'll talk about basically where we're going with it. And then I'll say, okay, everybody stand up and trade cards. I'll explain what they're going to do. And then you've got 1,000 people moving around the whole ballroom, trading cards, trying to get rid of cards. Then there's a second round of trading where we literally throw hundreds of decks of cards on the floor. People are on their hands and knees trying to get the best cards, giving other people cards. It is like the energy level in the room is probably like nothing you've ever experienced. It is so off the charts. And then we talk about what it means, but it's a content-driven speech with an experience that drives the learning.
Okay, and so when the outcome comes, just because I'm really curious now, what does it all mean? What are some of the big ahas that people get out of that experience?
So
this is me being curious.
Yeah, so there's, like I said, there's 52 cards with suits, colors, and numbers like a regular deck of cards, and each of them have words. And the goal is to get 5 cards where the words best describe how you see yourself: analytical, creative, organized, empathetic, things of that nature. And so when you have the 5 cards that you've selected, and then you've also received cards from other people, we go through the interpretation process. The suits, the colors, and the numbers all have meaning in terms of how you contribute to the success of an organization, how you detract from the success of an organization, which part of the innovation process will be where you excel, who do you need to partner with that you typically would not want to partner with because they're going to drive you crazy. Is your team playing with a full deck? That is, do you have a good balance of all the different styles on your team? So
I'm sure there's lots of humor in there to be mined.
This is
a full deck.
For sure. I mean, it is. So it's just what I love. And then what's great is everybody leaves with the 5 cards that they chose plus their gift cards. So when they go home, they put it on their wall at their desk, and now they have a reminder of the speech. So there's all these. So I think it's important to have experiences, but I also think it's important to have, things that people take away that they can then say, I'm now going to integrate this into my daily work.
That's really neat. I like that a lot. And it sounds like it creates a lot of fun in the room and people are walking away. Now, is there anything that you would do in a presentation other than personality poker to create engagement?
Absolutely. So, I mean, there's a number of different ways to do that. There are other experiments that I've developed. Mm-hmm. Each have a particular point that I'm trying to make. And the goal is just to, and they're not superfluous types of activities, which a lot of people love to do. Turn to the person next to you and talk about. No, these are every experiment that I do. leads people down a path where they believe they know the answer to the problem, and then I pull the rug from underneath them, and they go, what just happened? It's not what I expected. And it's a very, almost like this visceral reaction that people have that they will then never forget the learning from that experience.
Okay, so how do you walk me through that one? How do you deliver that out? Is it you asking a question? Sorry, tell me more about that.
Sure. I mean, and there's so many different ones that I use depending on the audience. So I'll give you one. One
Okay.
that I use is I walk on stage with a brick. It's not a real brick because putting one in my carry-on luggage is a bit of a problem these days. I used to travel with one. But it's just a foam brick that looks like a brick. And I'll say to people, okay, great. Here's what I want you to do. We're going to talk about the uses of a brick. And I want you to turn to the person next to you, and I want you to just 30 seconds, go back and forth and come up with all the uses of a brick that you can. Okay. So it could be as a doorstop and a chimney and a patio, break it in half, use it as bookends, whatever it is. They do that for 30 seconds. I say, okay, great. Here's what you just did. The way you solve this problem is by your past experience. And your past experience drives. So we know a brick is used in construction. So I could use it in patios and things of that nature. But we also know that it's heavy, so I can weigh down dead bodies. Or it's rough, so I can use it to buff something if I need to. It has holes, so I could plant things in it. So we look at our past understanding of the attributes and try to find solutions.
Right.
I say, we'll do it again. But this time, instead of looking at a brick and coming up with whatever use, you can only use a brick on a particular for particular context. So for example, I say, what are all the uses of brick on the body? And so now you can use it to balance your posture. You could use it, if it's a real brick, you could pump your biceps. You could use it as a loofah substitute if you can't find one, whatever it is. So they go back and forth, and they have 30 seconds to come up with the uses of a brick for one random context.
Okay.
And then we come back and I talk about, okay, well, which way yielded solutions that you felt were more creative? And I'll just do a show of hands. You've got the first way, which is looking at a brick. Second way, which is a brick for particular context, or you felt they were roughly the same. Consistently, I've done this now with about 500,000 people. Consistently, 90% of a group will choose the second method, which is the brick for a particular context. Now, we will have talked at some point about thinking outside the box is actually a terrible idea. The brain loves constraints. And so I use that example to show, look, the first method, you could do anything you wanted with a brick and you came up with the obvious predictable answers. When we forced you to limit the use of a brick in a particular instance, on the beach, in a kitchen, you came up with much better, more valuable solutions. And then I use that then to continue the conversation. So I can do that with thousands of people, and it's super easy to conduct, but the reaction is very positive.
I love it. And so would you then work in some of the research that you might have done about some of the innovation conundrums that they might have in this company? Talk a little bit about the research that you might do going in so that you'll know which of your things in your toolbox to draw from.
Yeah. So as with probably pretty much every speaker, we'll have at least one pre-event call. Sometimes it's multiple calls.
Okay.
And my goal is to, first of all, better understand, and I'm never trying to be an expert in their company. I'm never trying to be an expert in their industry.
Right.
I'm an expert in what I'm an expert in. And in fact, to me, the key with innovation is expertise is often the enemy of innovation. Because the more you know about a topic, the harder it is for you to see it differently. So I don't want to become an expert in their industry or their company.
Okay.
But what I want to understand is, what are the problems they're dealing with? What are the types of challenges they face? What are the disruptions that are taking place in their industry? The more I understand that, and the more I understand the objectives of the conference, then I can, and so I don't have a speech, I have puzzle pieces. And basically the puzzle pieces are stories, they're experiments, they're research, their points of view. And what I do is listen on these calls, and I'm slowly building the puzzle so that by the time the call is done, I can say, great, here's what I heard. Based on what I heard, here's what I think would be the best way to deliver this.
Okay.
And usually 9 out of 10 times, I'll nail it on the first try. Sometimes they're like, not quite right. And great. Okay, then let's have a deeper conversation.
Sure, sure. Okay. And do you have any tried and true kind of opening story that or closing story that you would call on the majority of the time?
I'd like to say yes, but the answer, unfortunately, is no. And I know for me, that's probably one of the areas of my speech that I wish I had more consistency.
Okay.
What I tend to do in the beginning, because I will, if I'm the opening keynote, it's different. I'll find a story that I think is appropriate. But if I'm like the last event that I just did a couple of days ago, I was on from 11 o'clock to 12 o'clock, the CEO, and there were a couple of other keynote speakers before me. And so I decided that and I always, if I can, sit in the audience and take notes because I want to hear what's happening. I want to watch the audience, feel the energy in the room. And usually in those situations, when I get up there, I will almost do a quick recap of what I heard in the morning and talk about how it relates to what I'm about to talk about.
Okay, nice.
Because I just find it personalizes it.
Sure.
Now, it's not like this amazing bring somebody to tears story that I know some people like to start with. It's not that at all. My closing story is not going to bring anybody to tears. But I just, to me, it's about relevance.
Mm-hmm.
And if I can be relevant in the minds of people and have them feel as though I listen to them. I mean, the feedback that I've actually gotten from the meeting planners after I do an event is that, first of all, I'm one of the only people who will sit there all day. Like I did a huge conference, a couple thousand people, and the event organizer came up to me afterwards, the meeting planner, and said, "You're the only person in doing this for 20 years who actually stayed the entire day, took notes, and then when you were on stage, you had callbacks to every single one of the speakers." And I think that's just so important because it makes it, because I do care and I want them to know I care. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
giving a canned speech.
That's nice. I really like that. Now, I don't know if I'm misremembering this. Do you have a story about someone who uh, invented something or was an innovator within his company, but he was very low down on the totem pole? I don't know where
Doesn't
I
sound
got
like a
that.
familiar story to
Okay,
me.
sorry. I'm kind of putting you on the spot, and well, actually, that's the kind of thing that I think would pull at the heartstrings. And there is a flavor. I remember the story, but I don't remember where I got it. There is a flavor of Doritos corn chips that the janitor in the company was responsible for. And
Hmm.
so there could be a story like that that would actually pull at people's heartstrings because I don't know why my mind went there, but I thought I would just tell you about that.
Yeah. And
Anyway.
I do have stories that can pull at heartstrings. It's interesting though. For me, again, it comes back to what we were talking about before. You've got your style. And I'm not
Mhm.
a I like things to be light because it's an intellectual conversation. Innovation
Right.
is it's a heady conversation. I'm an engineer by education.
Yeah.
Uh, and so for me, I don't want it to become heavy.
Sure.
I try to make it really, really light and fun and funny and playful because I want people to have a great time while they're there. And so anything that's too heavy just feels, I guess it's always felt a little manipulative to me, and it's just not my style.
So, the reason why I think that it works so well for you, Steve, is because when you hire for innovation, you're not often getting fun. Those words don't typically go hand in hand, and I think that it's a delightful surprise when you show up and you are like a professional speaker. That I'm sure they hire a lot of innovation experts who are not pros on the platform. And I want to talk to you about being a pro because that often means that you need to be innovative on the fly, which is the type of thing you've been leading up to. You sit in the audience and you recap, and then you talk about how that applies to what you're talking to. But what are some other things that have happened to you in the moment that you've had to bob and weave on?
Oh, well, I'll tell you what, first thing that has been a lifesaver for me, a game changer for me, and you got a little glimpse of it one time when you saw me speak when I was up in Toronto,
Hmm.
is using my iPad wirelessly connected to my Mac to be able to control everything. I can draw on my slides, which from an
that's
audience
super cool.
perspective, and I do more and more of it now than I did before because the audience loves it because it feels like I'm creating the speech in the moment when I'm drawing. Even if I'm drawing something I've drawn before, it feels like it's being created in the moment.
Talk about what app you use for that, because we want to put it in the show notes because I think it's a cool thing.
It's just Keynote. I mean, it only works in the Mac environment.
Okay.
So I have a MacBook Pro that connects to the projector.
Okay.
And then I actually use 2 different iPads that connect wirelessly to the Mac. And the other cool thing, so talking about the bobbing and weaving, this is drawing on the slides is great. Mm-hmm. But the thing that has been the game changer is also the ability to change what slides are showing.
Yeah.
From a sequential, because
you're moving with the presentation and you're taking out slides and skipping
exactly.
them and stuff, right? Yeah.
And nobody knows because the cool thing is when you're doing this, you can actually get a thumbnail of every single slide in your deck. Yeah. So I have the slides I think I'm going to present.
Right.
But then I have like 50 more slides afterwards. And I remember this one speech I gave, it was up in actually at Banff. And it was a company that I'd done an event for previously. And the person who hired me wanted me to do the same speech that he'd seen me do for another division. Mm-hmm. And then 5 minutes before I got on stage, I had a conversation with someone which made me realize this is the wrong speech for this group. And so I get up on stage and I asked a couple of questions of the audience just to sort of get a feel for things. And I realized it was definitely the wrong speech for a variety of reasons. And so I fortunately had those 50 extra slides in the deck, and I gave a completely different speech than I had planned on. And the great thing was the event organizer came up there and said, that wasn't what I hired you to do, but it was so much better for this audience. And that flexibility to change in the moment, or if the person before me is going too long, I can cut slides without having to say, well, if I had time, I would have shown you this slide, which is the most annoying thing that a speaker can do. I just skip them and nobody knows. So I'm silently creating in the moment.
Yeah, they don't know what you're skipping. I think a lot of people in the writing business, we call it murdering our darlings, like, taking out stories that you've always given because that they work. And sometimes it's really hard to let go of content, but the audience doesn't know what they're missing, and you can get over that really, really quickly. And I really hope you all listen to what Steve was just talking about, because not only is being able to read the audience so very, very important, but being able to switch and change and bob and weave on the fly like that, that is what a true professional speaker does. That is what a wealthy speaker does. And if you don't know how to do that and you're new to the industry, just know that that will come in time. Steve, if you would have been asked to do that in year 1 of your speaking, would you have been able to do it as eloquently as you did?
No, and I think the key is you have to know your content inside and out. I think that's the first thing.
Right.
You have to be comfortable enough. Improvising is basically what you're doing. It's sort of almost like an improv comedy routine that I'm up there. I don't know where it's going to go. And I think that's also really important is in the beginning, sometimes you almost feel like you need to prepare a lot. Now I find I want to prepare less and I want to have the structure in place so that I can improvise. So then it always feels like it's the first time I've given this speech, but it's polished so that it's almost this great combination of this amazing experience that doesn't feel like it's canned.
I love that. I do find that when we call it having it, it's a coaching term, you have the material, the content in your bones. And so you're kind of mentally flipping and literally on your iPad going, okay, here's where I'm going right now. So that's helping you mentally flip. But when you've got the material in your bones, you're never kind of thinking about what you're going to say next. And I think that's when speakers can get tripped up. That's where you'll see someone who's fresh out of Toastmasters and you can almost see them thinking about where they're going next in their presentation. Let me stand over here. And then they go, and it feels a little mechanical sometimes. We have to be careful not to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's when I look at a speaker that I really admire, it feels as though it's the first time they've given that speech, but they still give it flawlessly.
Mm.
And that to me is sort of that interesting balance, is that just that feeling's just so natural. And that's what I strive for as much as possible. Couldn't have done it in the beginning. And what I think is also interesting for me is my speech has gotten better when I've taken out content. So
Ah.
in an hour-long speech, I used to talk about 4 different things, and then it was
Mhm.
3, then it was 2. Now in an hour speech, I'm talking about one topic and only one topic.
Wow.
And I can go deep with it, but I can go wide with it. I can go all over the place with that one topic. And then people don't feel, okay, well, what were all the things that I learned? It's like, I learned the one thing that I can actually take away and use and do something differently tomorrow. And I think that's really the key, is when people go back, they actually have not just some nice feelings, but they actually have the tools to be able to go do something differently.
I think that's a ding, ding, ding moment in this podcast that people will want to write down. How can I deliver less? Because less is really more. I think that um, the idea coming into the industry is that the more content I give, the more they're going to love me. But when we unpack that, when they walk out the door and somebody asks, well, what did you learn? It's hard for them to tell because there's so many things going on in their brain, like their brains are exploding. So when you simplify it and reduce it down to 1 or 2 or 3 items, 3 max, but really I love the idea of 1. What do you think that does for people's brains?
We're all sort of ADD or overloaded with just too much information right now.
Mm-hmm.
So I just think simplicity is often the best innovation. The simpler we can make something, the more digestible we can make it, the more accessible and the more experiential we can make it, the more people will actually do something with it. And I measure the success of my speeches not by the applause and the rankings on the stage. It's
Mm-hmm.
really, did an organization fundamentally transform the way it does business based on just spending 1 hour with me?
Mm.
And I think the only way to do that is to really make sure you focus on one topic that you want people to do well.
That's really great.
And
Well,
the nice thing is they can bring me back to do topic 2 next time. So
there
it's
you go. There you go. And as you said before, a lot of your business is repeat business. And so you're obviously leaving them wanting more, which is fantastic and exactly what we want. Well, we've talked about engagement. We've talked about how, you are engaging people with this next book. Tell people where they can go ahead and get a copy of this book if they would like to participate in the pre-release.
yeah. So again, we're not selling it. So it's not
Mm-hmm.
something that you can actually go buy. But the best thing is to do is just go to steveshapiro.com. We haven't even put it on the website yet. So, but by the time this is out there, I'm
Yeah,
sure it'll be out there.
great.
And I don't even know where it'll be on the website, but there'll be a place for you to go request the book or something like that. So
Okay.
just go to the website and we'll figure it out by the time we get there.
SteveShapiro.com. We will put that in the show notes, and we'll also put I guess we'll have to figure out in the Keynote app on your iPad. That's just a link to the App Store. I'll have Monica put that in the show notes as well. I think that's really cool. I have a MacBook Pro, and it has the that line of photos across that are all your PowerPoints coming up. And so I can actually, but it's a small little thing though. I think on your iPad might be cooler. So we'll put that in the show notes as well so that people can see how you're delivering from the stage. Steve Shapiro, there's a reason why you're being asked back again and again. Your information is brilliant, and thank you for sharing some ideas on engagement with our listeners today. Really appreciate it.
Well, certainly my pleasure. I had a great time.
Thank you. And Wealthy Speakers, if you're listening in on iTunes, please make sure you give us a rating or a review so that some more and more people can find us. And you'll find our show notes over at our podcast page at speakerlauncher.com. And with that, we will say, see you soon, Wealthy Speakers. Bye for now, everyone. Thanks for listening to the Wealthy Speakers Show. please visit speakerlauncher.com for your free Wealthy Speaker audit, and visit speakerlauncher.com/podcast for show notes and many more resources to help you catapult your speaking business. See you soon, Wealthy Speakers.